Hello, my name's Tony Morvin. I'm Editor-in-Chief at SC Magazine. We're here today at the IAM Gartner Summit talking to David Meyer at OneLogin, VP Product. David, you've been saying very much that companies need to have an IAM strategy. Why do they need a strategy? What's the purpose of it?
So an identity management strategy lets companies ensure that the right people can access the right things at the right time. The IT landscape for companies is fundamentally changing, and it's changing very rapidly. First, they started to adopt a lot of cloud applications, so you needed identity management in the cloud. And then they started to have workers work from places other than the office very frequently. And then you had to make sure people were secure when they're not connected to the domain at headquarters. And then people started to do all their work on devices. And all of these fundamental changes means you need identity management running from the cloud because that's the only place all of these things connect to.
But isn't the cloud a less secure option?
It's a common myth, an outdated myth really, that the cloud is less secure than on-premise. If you're trying to mitigate all the possible threats of today's possible exploits from cyber criminals, etc., from on-premise, you need to be better than all of them. And very few companies have the resources and assets to make sure that happens. But cloud systems like Amazon are incredibly secure. There's no way you or I could gain access to those systems. There's no way. But you or I, if we spent our time and did social engineering, could walk into almost any of these offices around London just by being persistent.
So having decided then that we do need a strategy and that cloud is a potential option, how would you go about implementing or advising a company to implement a strategy for IAM?
So a company has to decide what their goals are and where they want to be as an organization a few years from now, and then begin the journey. The nice thing about a cloud identity solution like OneLogin is we connect to all of your existing enterprise systems. So if you have an identity provider on-premise, we can federate with that and extend that to all of your cloud apps. That's oftentimes the first step people take. And then they start doing more and more in the cloud and making the cloud the master. And when the cloud's the master, we can provision these new identities into your on-premise systems. So you start from syncing your on-premise stuff to the cloud, and then you start driving things from the cloud and pushing things down. And progressively, you can connect all of your existing on-premise apps as well to the cloud identity system. And when you're ready, you can sever your ties with the past and start decommissioning your on-premise systems.
So we're talking, and the OneLogin is an example that we're looking at two-factor as a much better way to go. So when you're deciding on two-factor, how do you actually decide what factors you're going to use? How do you actually implement this policy? And,
Sure.
and also, I'm quite interested, using cloud, that it's a multinational world we're living in, an international world, and regulations tend to be country or region specific. How do you deal with this cross-border issue of different people having different approaches?
So let me take the second part of the question first. OneLogin cares deeply about customers' data, and we understand that data residency laws differ from country to country to country. About 2 years ago, we opened up a system in the EU for that reason. So customers can choose EU data residency or US data residency. And that was a fundamental choice for us. Just last week, we announced a step to go further where we're partnering with T-Systems in Germany. And T-Systems will operate OneLogin systems from their cloud, with their employees being the only ones that touch the machines. And that helps because OneLogin is an American company. It's a US company, and we're beholden in that way to US laws. But if OneLogin can't access the systems, and they're fully operated by German employees that operate from a German company, it's fully protected from not only a data residency perspective, but American legal perspective.
So, for example, if you've got a German and a Russian person cooperating on one document, and each of those countries is saying that you have to have data residency in that country, you're saying it's down to the customer to decide which jurisdiction they apply?
That's right. The laws, there's myriad laws in all these different countries, which in some cases, like the one you just mentioned, conflict. If two people are working on something and they're in different countries, both of whom say the data can only be stored in that company, in that country, what is a vendor to do?
Okay.
So what we do is let the customer decide which jurisdiction, which legal jurisdiction they want their data stored in, and we provide that as a possibility in where we run their system.
Okay, so regulation is obviously an issue. What do you see as the biggest threats in the year ahead for identity management?
So, in the years ahead for identity management, it's keeping pace with the technological change. There's going to be, everybody uses phones and tablets to do their business today. They might use nose piercings tomorrow. And as more and more things get connected to applications, the identity system in the cloud needs to adapt to those. So what we see is new standards evolving, such as NAPs for native apps that's based on OAuth 2, augmenting SAML, which is really browser-based. And as you have these more programmatic access standards available, more things can connect to this control plane in the cloud, which is identity management.
And we're going to have to wind it up now, but what would you give us maybe the single biggest piece of advice to companies to actually go away and implement and improve their identity management?
So the biggest advice I'd give to companies is back to what you first mentioned, which is don't be afraid of the cloud as being less secure. It's in fact, if you think about it, the only place you can be secure. Because you need every access your employees and your customers and your partners have to be governed by this identity management system. And there's no way to do that from on-premise, and there's no way that your IT organization can keep pace with all of the criminals out there trying to access your data. You need to rely on certified cloud vendors that pass all the regulations to do that for you. And lastly, security is just as much about humans and culture as it is about technology. I mentioned social engineering before. People need to understand if someone says, hey, can you let me in the door? You need to know who they are, because that person could be a vector that's going to try to compromise the security of your system. So cultural security training by a customer is just as important as any technology they employ.
David, thank you very much. Some very useful advice there from David, including some reassurance on use of the cloud. That's it from us now at SC. Thank you.
Thank you very much.